Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another fucking podcast.
Not another fucking podcast.
Yeah, another fucking podcast. Another one to add to the list of fucking podcasts that you need to listen to.
So many, far out.
So many podcasts. I'm in the bath again, as you can tell. I got a little bit cold this evening, and I was like, I want a bath, and I knew I was going to speak with Khali this evening, so I was like, you all right if I do it in the bath? And it's like, of course, no problem. Yeah. So Khali is a good friend of mine. We've been friends for like almost 10 years now. Coming up on 10 years.
Yeah,
not quite, but coming up on 10 years. We ran a business together for a period of time, Tribe. And yeah, we've just hung out a lot. We've really dived into the world of authentic relating and circling together. And we've really both started on this journey at the same time. And we've kind of, even though we haven't always lived in the same area, we've kept in touch. The past 10 years, we've kept really close.
Integral as well. I think it was quite a pretty shared journey for us as well.
Yeah. I think we got into integral theory around the same time. We got into authentic relating, got into circling, we got into all these things at the same time that have been really informative for both of our life journeys.
Totally. Yeah.
There's this really beautiful shared path, and I had the very first time I met Khali, I came and stayed at his nice. I'd never met him in person before. Do you remember that? Knock on the door, and you open up, and the first thing I say is, "Look at these new shoes I bought."
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. It was we jumped right in. We jumped in like really fast. Yeah,
totally, massively. I'm grateful.
Me too.
You've been an important influence on me, Jamie. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Likewise. A few speed bumps, a few bumps early on, but that developed a lot of trust between us.
Yeah.
And likewise, I've really appreciated the support and the way you've been there. Past 9 years or so of my life. So I'd love you to introduce yourself a little bit. And so I'm going to ask you, so you can answer these in any order you like, but how about what you do in the world, what you're up to in the world currently, something that I'm just trying to think about how to phrase this right. Something that if people knew about you, they'd love you.
Okay.
A little bit of vulnerability there. And then just what's most alive for you at the moment? What are you really curious about?
Sweet. Okay. So I suppose just like a bit of my background first. So my work life, I do organisational coaching work or agile coaching, if people are familiar with that. Actually more general and agile coaching these days, a lot of org change work. So currently I have a team of coaches that I'm leading, 3 coaches, and I'm working for a software company called Elmo Software, which is a rapid scale up, which is really cool. It's really interesting. I get to kind of, have a lot of influence around culture and leadership and kind of how an organization works and like looking at how to make it work better, and so I think that's a really deep inquiry for me. What does it look like for human beings to collaborate effectively together, and ideally not in a way that's oppressive and kind of manipulative, which I think actually, at least to some level, is super rife, in all forms of collaboration. And actually, if you look at the history of collaboration, it comes from religion and military, right? So very, very hierarchical. So I'm particularly interested in what does it look like to not exclude hierarchy, but to acknowledge that there's different forms of hierarchy, different people are better at different things. And then how do we actually co-create together? So that's a pretty deep inquiry for me, and the work that I do is like very immersed in that kind of space.
And something I really like, knowing you and knowing a bit about your work that I really appreciate is when you say like how to have an organization function better, you're not talking just about quantitative data, quantitative measures. You're also talking about qualitative data. What does better mean for the actual culture? What does better mean for the experience of working inside an organization?
Yes, totally. Well, and that's hugely important, and like one of the things that I'm actually doing at the moment is putting business cases together exactly around that. So, I'm working with some pretty hard-nosed business people who are very focused on just the bottom line, which is pretty standard in the business world. And but actually, I think the evidence in my mind is pretty clear that if you get really good employee engagement, if you make it a great place to work, you will improve the bottom line. But how to actually reason that people kind of really clicks in is like something I'm like working on and figuring out at the moment. And of course, you could add, there's like a classic thing is a triple bottom line, right? Which also includes kind of environment. What else I want to share? I'm a pretty big geek around psychology. I'm constantly reading and playing with psychology. My partner Prem is a psychologist. We're kind of constantly geeking out around that. I do have private coaching clients, which actually gets a lot more into the kind of psychological space. I think the last thing that's present for me to share is that I've also had a kind of, a spiritual practice for a long time, meditative practice, and and which can mean a lot of different things, but I suppose that its crux for me is about just living with heart and practicing, cultivating an expanded awareness that has us more deeply in touch with life and the symbolic, metaphorical level of life, a place where life speaks to us in a different kind of way, where we can be in the dream of life dreaming us.
Life dreaming us.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So the second question, remind me what the second question was. I remember there was one about like what would have people love me.
what no, not what would have people love you. What is something that if people knew about you, they'd end up loving you?
I think I operate a lot from the heart, and I think that kind of touches people and in different ways. I think I can be very playful, and kind of fun. I like to play music, and I like to kind of dance and just be joyful, and I think I can also be like quite intense, like with like ideas. I think this is one of the places that we've kind of enjoyed it, our relationship, and also just like a sense of passion for living life large and creating a better world as best I can, which I'm pretty challenged by at times. Sometimes I think it's just in this really simple things, like I got 2 daughters who are 11 and 8, and just can I just love them well, and I think that's like the last few years actually have been pretty challenging for me, and I think it's been very humbling, and this question of like, I don't know, like what are the qualities that people would love? I think just like making space for each of us and the things that all of us love in our own different ways, and the different places that we're challenged. And I think just like that feels important to me, to have a sense of humility and not knowing and making space for people.
I'm often touched by the level of care you show towards people, and also a lot of generosity. So you're a very, very generous person in that way.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah. Was there another question?
Like what's most alive for you at the moment? We can kind of start there, and then maybe we can see if we can weave in the topic somehow.
Yeah.
That we can't quite figure out what the topic was. We spoke about this topic like 3-4 months ago, and I was like, I want to do a podcast with you. Can you please remember the topic? So we kind of remember it. We don't remember the context, but we know we wanted to talk about it. So we'll see if we find it.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll find something interesting.
Totally. We always do. What's most alive for me? Certainly, I think the inquiry that I presenced at the beginning, that's been alive for me for a long time. What does kind of co-creation look like? How do we incorporate difference and co-create? I find myself at the moment really interested in, like, for want of a better word, like soul psychology. Like what, even the concept of soul is like an interesting question to me. And I'm thinking at the moment of soul as like a phenomenological experience. It's not like this kind of incorporeal entity, we can't think about it like that, but I'm more interested in like what is it to kind of, what does it feel like to be in touch with my soul? And really to me, that's more like what's most deeply meaningful to me and what's most alive for me and essential for me, my essential life. So this question itself to me is a very kind of soul oriented question, and then what does it look to be almost like in communion with that level of ourselves, where we're in connection with this place that's like deeply felt, deeply alive, deeply meaningful, and to me there's like a subconscious element that goes back to the dreaming thing I was saying, right? Like it's like a place of being in touch with our shamanistic mind, a symbolic mind. Yeah, I haven't even really kind of connected the kind of those different maps together so much. But I've also been playing a lot with these awakened mind meditations, which are visualization based and kind of let our subconscious minds kind of populate the content of the meditations, and that's kind of almost like a way methodology of like get in touch with this like soul consciousness. And I've been reading quite a bit of psychosynthesis, which is a psychology kind of that was come up with by an Italian psychologist, Roberto Asciagioli, and he was one of the first pioneers in transpersonal psychology. He called it transpersonal self, but a lot of his kind of contemporaries, I think, have started to use the word soul more. And so part of it kind of, from his angle is about synthesis. It's about, so it was all about kind of integrating polarities, but then he had this vision of the supreme synthesis, which is like all of humanity coming into synthesis. So it's very resonates a lot with Integral. And so that kind of that place where soul in a sense is also the place that connects us with everything, and that the larger picture that has us kind of come into like what, and the question of like what's really meaningful, like, and to me connection is a huge part of that.
Housemate coming in to brush her teeth,
That's funny.
I love this, like it immediately, because I use the notion of soul in kind of the framework that I've been running my work from, which has come from the stuff that we developed together. So it's kind of drawn from that, and it just like it really has me reflect. So we came up with a domain model. You and I, we were kind of really geeked on the kind of the somatic level, the emotional. They're domains that are real, but we codify them in terms of authentic, relating, and circling. So we have the somatic, the sensation, the level of sensation in the body. We have the emotion, the level of feeling and emotions in the body. We have the mind, the level of thought. And then to me, the next level is the level of soul. And what you're speaking to is its values, its synthesis, its integration, it's our sense of wholeness. And I love that. I love that sense of like actually creating a distinction around soul. It isn't this nebulous sort of flippant thing that's thrown around a soul, but there's actually something tangible to it. And there's something tangible that I can connect to and relate from and be related to from also. Like my soul can receive you. I can receive you at the level of my soul, and I can speak to you at the level of my soul as well. I can also speak to you at the level of my meaning making, my thoughts, and say and receive you there. And I can speak at the level of my emotions and receive there, and speak at the level of sensations in my body and receive there. So it's quite, I love this sense of this tangibility of this phenomena of us.
Nice. And something that I feel kind of really called to, in a sense, is to help kind of cultivate that, like certainly, helping people step into that themselves, but also just like really in the world, so the organizational work I do, like what does it look like to kind of tap into that, the soul of the organization? What is that? What does that mean? Which, to me, that's a lot of it is about tapping into the soul of the people, but an organization is a context, like, and that context in a sense has an essence to it. What's the purpose here? Why are we together here? And that to me is not a static thing. That should be something that's alive and inquired into and changes as kind of, the people learn and the company kind of figures out how it meets the marketplace and so on. And but that, I think there's so much scope to make a difference in the world, really, by kind of impacting how companies kind of work and show up in the world. And so there's like helping cultivate that, call that forth, the soul of organization.
Do you think, like, if we start to tap into or move up to, it's almost integrated, it's above, it's like it's larger domain that we move into and integrate all our other domains, do you feel if we move into this level of the soul, is there an inherent ethics in it? Like, does that naturally arise in ethics, an ethics base?
Yeah, I do. I that's a really interesting question to me. I do. I think that the soul level of us is the part of us that is simultaneously connected to everything, and in a sense just intrinsically values truth, beauty, and goodness. And like one of the qualities in particular of the soul that I've been sitting with a lot is beauty. I think beauty is a really important part of the soul. When you feel that in yourself, or you're connecting with another person, that kind of where they're just in their radiance, like, or I'm feeling my own like sense of specialness, and that's the sense of like just love, deep love for myself, and how there's like a glow to it. One of the books I'm reading around the soul at the moment, he talks about soul presence, and that there's almost like this quality that starts kind of exuding from us. And to me, this is the quality of beauty, and
we know this quality, like we can recognize it. You can, when you see it, you go, that person is radiating.
Yes. Yeah.
And it may be someone who's just been in a deep experience of love. Perhaps they've experienced like earth-shattering intimacy and they're radiating as a result of it. There's like no room for anything other than love to exist inside of them at that moment. And they just radiate, they glow, and you go, wow,
yes,
that person is like stunning,
Yeah,
there's like
totally.
beauty. Yeah.
Totally. Well, to me, like an analogous question is, if we feel completely loved, do we act ethically? And that's the same type of question to me. If we're like, we're so filled up with our own self-love, which of course I think ends up leading to other people naturally wanting to love us as well, then there's no need to step into controlling patterns. There's no need to step into spite and malice and whatever it is, revenge and
jealousy and envy and greed.
Yeah, and that's not to say that we might kind of not speak firmly with people, and of course that to me is an important part of ethics in a sense. But if we're in full self-love, we're going to also welcome our needs and our desires, and not make other people wrong if we're expressing those needs and desires in a way that may be different from what they want. Yeah. And
I
so
love that.
Yeah, you go.
Go on. No, you carry on.
Well, I was just going to say this to me is then the natural synthesizing aspect of this soul quality. It's just naturally connects and includes.
Well, I was just going to say I really love the idea of that of an organization. I remember watching a long time ago a movie called The Corporation. I don't know if you ever saw it.
No, it's on my list. It's one I've meant to watch for ages. Yeah, I know the movie.
Oh, it's so intense. So they went ahead and they did a psych profile, a psych analysis on the corporation, because legally corporations act as individual entities, right? They have the legal status of an individual. And so they're like, okay, well, if this corporation has the legal status of an individual, that means we can treat them as an individual. That means we can run a psychological profiling on them like we would do to any individual. And so that's what the premise of this movie is. And the conclusion they came up to was, if a corporation, the basic structure of a corporation was an individual in our society, we would be labeling them as psychopathic. They're actually psychopathic.
Yeah.
And there's a whole checklist, not having concern for human well-being, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole checklist of them. And so it's almost like invigorating this notion of the soul inside of a corporation is an antidote to that psychopathic or the narcissistic kind of tendencies.
Yes.
We were talking about narcissism quite a bit recently in our book club.
Yeah.
And it's like that connection to what you're saying, the part that's connected to all of us, that actually somehow touches all of us, that part that's bigger than us, that's connected to our deep values, is naturally ethical. And if we were to invigorate a corporation with that quality, if we were to awake a corporation to its own soul,
amazing.
The world would be a different place. Like, actually, if that was like a paradigm that rippled through the corporate environment, within 5 years, the world would be radically different, and we would probably solve the majority of our environmental problems would be solved really, really quickly. If we turned all our ingenuity towards fixing basically the environment and human well-being and health, boom, like it would happen so fast.
Totally. I there's a couple of things that spark for me as you share that. So one is that the number of sociopaths in corporates is way higher than the general population. So that's really interesting. That's like, there's pretty good research on that. So that's really like, why is that? That's an interesting question to me, and I think it's because so much of organizations are power dynamics, and people who can go in and actually really like assert a lot of power can also get a lot done, so and people who are kind of more narcissistic, sociopathic, will kind of wield power, in a way that kind of lacks empathy. That's kind of what the definition is, and therefore they can actually kind of overtake people. And this is like one of the really sad things about kind of organizations is the reality is particular types of control patterns will actually get results, at least in the short term, so so many organizations are very short term oriented how they work. Some typical CEOs are only going to be there for a few years. It's the same with our political system, right? So then you've got a systemic structure that actually kind of has people act in ways that kind of will meet the system, but in the larger ecology that system is embedded within isn't actually so good in the longer term. So that's one thing that's really interesting to me, and that's something I'd be really curious to keep exploring and understanding. The other thing that's really interesting to me is it's like all nice and kind of great to be in the idealism of like awakening the soul of organizations, which is like totally me, like my jam. I like, I totally have a very strong idealism. And it's also when you get down to the basic reality of business, very, 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 very challenging. Like, the reality is people misbehave a lot of the time. They don't understand the context of what needs to happen. And there's like really hard kind of whatever it is, deadlines, targets, goals that need to be met for a business to actually work properly. So then accountability becomes a really, really important quality. So what is it to actually have really good boundaries and hold the line and kind of call people out when they're not meeting expectations? But what is it to do that in a way that's honoring, and sensitive and allows
brings their best out rather than shames them into contracting subtle resentment.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I'm a boss, I'm a manager. And this has been really important for me, this whole territory for the past few months. There's times where I've needed to call people out not meeting my expectations, and call out ways in which they're not performing how I would like them to perform. But then but it's kind of vulnerable territory ultimately, because like, who am I to say what the right way to be performing is, and but at the same time, if I'm going to make a difference, I need to make stands, and I need to actually own kind of what I believe is right, and own my sense of power, and this is where, like, I think it's so important for all of us who do actually have idealistic kind of values and beliefs to actually step into our power, and even if we might be wrong, and so that whole territory, like, the reality is, I think a lot of people are just very sleepy. They're not awake to the larger context that they're embedded within, and that's very, very true in corporates. As corporate sleepers are rife.
Very easy to just show up, get your paycheck, and go home and kind of sleepwalk through life.
Yeah, totally.
Massively. Something that I just like, there's so much in what you just shared that I wanted to jam on, but the thing about that you said at the end of, like, people who are idealists to step into their power, and something that I've been reflecting on a lot. I've actually been reflecting, I've kind of been phrasing it in my head along the lines of, like, our greatest vulnerability is actually becoming the greatness we already are. Like, that's actually the most vulnerable thing we can do, is becoming how great we actually are. Like, when I think about being as powerful as I actually can be and capable of, it's terrifying. Like, that feels vulnerable. Like, it's so exposing. It's so putting myself out there, and it's so setting myself up for, like, a lot more work, a lot more effort, a lot more things that can go wrong, a lot more targeting. The louder voice I become, the more people will take pieces out of me. It just happens.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's almost like also the larger impact you're making, the bigger the, like, impact your mistakes are going to make too, like,
totally. And the more scrutiny they're going to receive.
And like, just because kind of whatever it is, we're, like, more noticed, that we're kind of, people know us more, doesn't mean we're not, like, infallible and human and make mistakes, and, like, and of course, there's more, like, responsibility in a sense. We got to, like, own the fact that we're going to have larger impacts, and I think that's important. But if we never, like, own the power because we're too scared that, like, we're going to make negative impacts, well, that's shit too, right? Like, then you just end up with the sociopath taking the power, like.
That's right. It's just easier to stay small and let the people who love power go for it. Power for them isn't vulnerable. Power for them is, like, that's how they feed in a way.
Totally.
And then the other thing that I think about is, it's like there's this multi-threaded awakening, like, it's like multi-directional. And so we're talking about, like, corporate awakening and the organization becoming awake to itself, and then as a result naturally, inherently having a good impact on the world, because it becomes, ethically orientated, becomes in touch with its soul. But in order to do that, it's like hundreds of thousands or millions of individuals need to start waking up into that, like, need to start opening to that. And you're just reporting of, like, a lot of corporate sleepwalking, of a lot of, like, just like, man, whatever. And then it's almost like the people who do start to kind of awaken a little bit, not across the board, but a lot of people who start to, like, wake up a little bit and have this kind of, like, little spiritual awakening or something, and go, oh wow, maybe there's more to life than this, tend to just be like, I'm out, I'm walking out of the corporation, and I'm going to go, at extreme cases, live in an ashram or become a yoga teacher or something like that, which is all fine. But the system, I believe, is like the ideal world, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, is going to come from inside of the system, not from outside of the system. Like,
totally.
there may be pockets outside of it, but larger systemic change happens from the inside. And I definitely, like, I really admire and appreciate that you've stuck in there, that, like, you're still in there, you're still having a go, even though it's like, imagine it's heavy, like, it's like you feel like one man against this, like, giant machine,
There's a couple of, I think, really kind of striking things for me in that. So one is this value that I know you also hold of, like, win-win-win, so, which is like, I can, like, say in a corporate system, like I can win, I can have my purpose met, my values met, you can win too, right? Kind of whoever you is, it might be, someone in a different part of the organization that we've kind of got some kind of tension that we're holding with each other, whatever it is. Like I'm in support and, we need to like improve quality because I don't want to have to kind of keep like dealing with all these support issues around the same thing all the time. And this other person's in sales and they want more new features faster so they can sell to customers faster, and they don't want to slow things down with quality. So inherently we end up in these types of tensions based on where we sit in the system, right? But actually, if we come together and we understand the larger purpose that we're trying to enact here, we can figure out what win-win is going to look like. Of course, that's just an organizational context. It might be my sense of values too, which might be, I want to go party with my friends on the weekend, and this is just about having money. But at the same time, I can actually, engage within that context, within what the organization is trying to achieve. And I don't have to like work my ass off to do it. I can still have my like fun life at the same time, but what's that balancing place where they come together, and then the third win is like the larger mission of the organization and the larger place it can kind of serve within society. So this to me, figuring that out and figuring out how to negotiate it and reference it and have respect within it is like really super, super fundamentally important. The other piece that struck me was like, I do think we need to prototype new systems within kind of the system that we're in. So I do think there is a place to step outside of the system to start doing that. And this is a very famous Buckminster Fuller quote, that the best way to change a system is to actually create a new one that makes the old one obsolete. So, and that's different maybe to someone who's just like, I'm out, I'm just going to go like meditate in an ashram, or whatever, So, and I'm often thinking like that, doing change work in organizations. I'm like, actually, quite often there's already positive deviance. There's positive signs of change within the organization. People have already figured out how to tackle some of the things. And if we can just find those and kind of help nurture them, and that's like a new system that's starting to form. And to me, this is a lot of what actually informs how I think about change. Change wants to happen. We just have to find where it already is and kind of listen for the energy of it, listen for the desire of it, kind of release it.
I love that term, positive deviance. That's like, that really speaks to me somehow. Like, I feel like super cheeky inside, like with the notion of like, I can be a positive deviant. Like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah. I'm actually like full trickster mode, cheeky, out in the world, but like creating positive impact as a result of that.
Yeah, totally.
Philippe Lewis, who I've done a prior podcast with, he just posted recently about like his kind of take on light and dark, masculine and feminine. And he was saying like there's healthy and unhealthy versions of both the light and the dark. And he was like the positive dark masculine is kind of like that. The positive dark masculine injects what was it? But it's like positive deviance, basically. It's like injects chaos or structure or something like that in service of things growing.
Yeah, nice. It kind of reminds me of like just being irreverent, and provocative, and kind of the value of that. It's actually it's a different version of what I was saying, but it's actually, I think, also super important in organizations. Like dissent is actually really important in organizations. Like a lot of the like organizations are so much actually about compliance, just like, okay, here's the policy and the process of how we do things, and you need to kind of follow how you do it, and of course there is like, you do need people to actually agree to do things, but there's so much bureaucracy. There's like so much that people are asked to do that actually, when you kind of really look at it, could be so much better, and then those voices of who like say that, like who are willing to actually go, this makes no sense, why are we doing this, like this sucks, those dissenters generally squash down organizations, but actually they're really
not just in
voice.
Organizations, in culture too.
Totally. So how do you actually one, how do you invite dissent in a kind of positive way, a dissent that doesn't end up into just like fighting, and hold that, and how do you kind of harness it, and listen to what's actually being said, or behind what's being said, like have the inquiry of like why this person is dissatisfied. A lot of the time people will share that they're dissatisfied, but actually takes kind of a few steps underneath that to get to what their experience is, to really harvest kind of the gold out of why people are dissatisfied.
Yeah. Well, and also like the dissenters, these are the ones that get squashed down and like you're just complaining. They're usually saying things that a lot of people are thinking, but don't feel confident enough to speak.
Yeah.
So they're the ones that'll just can't tolerate it. Speaking, I mean, I think about it like in a circling context. The circling is an objective kind of relational practice that we do. Is that that'll be the voice of dissonance in the room. It'll be so loud and everyone's feeling it, but no one says a thing until somebody says it, and it's like it's almost like relief. Like when we're in that space of welcoming difference, when we're in that space of welcoming different voices, it's like, oh yeah, like you're right, like thanks for voicing that. The getting unbearable. And I wonder about that in a corporate context. Like, imagine making space for those voices. Like they're actually valuable voices.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this is a few years ago. I was consulting in a large telecommunications company, and they were setting up an offshore delivery center to write software in China. So I was running a workshop with people in Sydney, and there was one person in particular who was like irate. He was like, he was kind of almost yelling, he was like, they're just going to take our jobs and why are we doing this? And of course there was a lot of validity to that. There was like setting this delivery center offshore because it's a lot cheaper, and there's companies do this all the time. And in that instance, I don't think I was particularly elegant. I was like triggered and it was like, whoa. I was like, how do I even hold this? And I was in a particular political dynamic, and I wasn't really a scenario I could like ultimately have him feel fully heard. Though, as I think about it now, maybe there was like a way I could have done it. And that was like a really striking experience to me, just with that question of like how could his voice have been better included, but also how could the larger context be presence and referenced more strongly. The reality is, a lot of companies will struggle to compete if they don't actually figure out how to lower their costs around their stuff, and I think there's more than just that, because there's how much money does a company really need to make? So there's those types of questions that start to get into there as well. But there is business realities, and I think a lot of the time though that people aren't invited into that part of the conversation. They're not invited into that the conversation of actually, we're in a global marketplace that's actually pretty fucked up because we just play with different currency rates, and what does that mean for us? How do we kind of operate in a world like that? And of course, like if you bring like a employee kind of on the ground into that type of conversation, it can become very, very overwhelming very quickly, and so you kind of get all of that complexity start to appear. But my belief is that that's exactly what needs to happen, and with the, like, not too much, you don't want to like, you go like, what's the right amount of context they can start to kind of handle in a sense, or is appropriate to what they actually want to know, or kind of, or where they're at. It can be a bit of a journey to start to digest that bigger picture. But that to me is kind of what, in a sense, the awakening is about. It's about going, hang on, what is this larger context here, and how, okay, like I said, not everyone can like digest that quickly. It's like a lot to take in if you really start to really look at what's going on in the world and how our systems actually work, but if we don't actually go into that, we just the status quo of our systems are really moving us towards falling off a cliff, so the start of it, even just in organizations of, even if it's a shitty context, like, currency inequalities and what that means for how businesses work, I think is an important starting point. but it's, like that experience to me is one that I've sat with again and again over the years, because of like how hard it was for me to figure out how to kind of set up the conversation to include both in a sense the voice of dissent and the larger business kind of voice that I was like being asked to represent as well.
Has me like listening to that, I just found myself reflecting on what is the awakening almost. And like, I think I heard a glimpse of something in there that I just want to speak. And it's like, I had two questions that like emerged to me of like, oh, these are the kind of questions that arise when you start into this so-called awakening. And that, the first one is like, what am I in service of? Like, that's like until that question arises, you are kind of asleep. There is a kind of, I'm just going through life just to live. I don't have any question of what is the greater sense of being alive. And so when I ask, what am I in service of? Because like, I'm here. So what's it in service of? Is it in service of pleasure? Is it in service of, making a difference to what, for what? Like it's a pretty deep existential question. What am I in service of?
Yeah.
And then it's like, we might find something. So, I've thought about this, a fair bit, and I do practices, I've developed a practice in my course to kind of get to this very quick. And it's like, I often come up with, I'm in service of evolving consciousness, and that's like, at some point, I hope that becomes redundant, like I don't have to do that anymore. But like, that's what I feel in service of, it's very strong. And then the second question, it gives rise to the second question of like, and what is my unique design that allows me to do that?
Nice.
And that's the essence, that's the soul. What is it that is uniquely me? That my set of skills and talents, of which I believe every single person has, has some unique, whether they've discovered them or not, has some very interestingly unique set of skills and talents. And some of them actually need other people in order to function. Like, they don't function independently of others. They function in relation. They're very relational skill sets. To achieve that service, to function for the best I can in service of this thing, this force. So I just found myself really sitting with that.
Yeah, nice. Love that. Yeah. I also think about, where do you sit in the systems that you kind of a part of?
Yeah.
That was relevant in the story that I was just talking about. And I think that's very connected to, what am I in service of, or like, what am I about, and how is the journey that I've taken in my life kind of, helped me continue to deepen in that or understand that. Or maybe I was really off course, but that was part of the process of me seeing that. So that's one thing. Another thing I think about here is, I think a lot of people, like, this is part of what I'm actually kind of playing with it at the moment at work. I've been running a training, and this is a really important part of the training I've been running. Like, what's your purpose here, and what are your values, but a lot of the time that question can almost be like, it just feels so lofty that a lot of people, I felt this at times, like, where do I go with a question like that? My purpose is to change the world, and blah, 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 blah. My values are like truth, and, and like, not to knock all that. I think that's important. For some people, it works really, really well. But I like playing with those questions in just like a simpler way that, so I was like asking people to share their values at work, but I didn't really even use the word value so much. I just said, like, hey, what do you care about? What matters to you? What's important to you? And for some people, it's like really simple. Like I said before, just like hanging out with my friends on the weekend, okay, maybe like, I think, as people awaken to larger contexts, they will naturally start to care about different things. And I think some people
or maybe bigger context of things. It's like, I care about hanging out with my friends on the weekend, yet what supports that being as easeful a thing as we can have between us? What supports me able to, like, if I think about myself, like, my actual core desire is to like live in a small house and watch trees grow. That's I don't really have much more than that, like, and watch trees and children grow and make love and read books. Like, I don't want to do anything else. But it's like, without greater global systemic change, that isn't very, like, I may be able to live like that, but will future generations be able to live like that?
Yeah.
Maybe not, you know? And so it's almost like there's this imperative to go, okay, well, I need to make an impact on the world that allows that dream to be an easier, more valid, more acknowledged, more cherished dream that exists in the realm of possibilities here.
Yeah, totally.
You know? I mean, of course it does, but it's definitely not a cherished dream as apart from like, oh, you're just a lovely idealistic dreamer in our current culture. But maybe I'm not the only one who has those kind of fantasies.
Yeah. I'd like to climb the trees after they've grown.
Totally, me too. Yeah, and watch the grandkids get really good, like watching two generations like grow up in a forest and like full on nature parkour, and they're just like swinging through the trees like without any safety gear and everything. I'm just like, can you bring me some mangoes back? You know,
love that. Yeah.
Bring them back. Bring mangoes back for your granddad.
Yeah. Just something I want to reference here is, like, I think the soul is both transcendent and immanent, right? But I think a lot of people just kind of gravitate towards the transcendent piece. You know, there's like the soul is this thing that I like reach for, that's outside of me, that's larger than me, that's kind of filled with divine light and kind of knows my essential purpose, you know, and like, I think that's true. That's the transcendent pole. And the immanent pole is like the soul is like right here, right now. It's like, it's alive in our body. It's alive in our aches and pains, you know. It's like, and those aches and pains are actually telling us things, you know. They're communicating where maybe we could be listening to our body a little bit more, maybe moving our body a little bit more, and actually those things, if we listen to them and follow them, will then actually open up more aliveness in us and our experience. And that aliveness, you know, is the quality of the soul, you know. And as we just trust it and trust that, in a sense, everything is it, you know, in our experience. And this is amazing to me. This is something that circling super taught me, you know, that we just like welcome what is and let it take its course, in a sense, you know, by engaging with the flow of it, you know, the aliveness of it, that it will actually, it'll change, it'll transform, it'll you know, start kind of creating us as we're engaging with it, you know. And this to me then connects to what I was saying about, like, it doesn't have to be this lofty sense of purpose. It can be the basic stuff, you know, like actually I just like eating good food, you know, like
and what does it mean? What does it mean to have good food on this planet? You know? But what I also wanted to add, like you spoke of like the transcendent, like this is the lofty purpose, you know, like I'm here to evolve consciousness, this big transcendent purpose. And then there's this immanence, this like descending force, which is actually quite pragmatic. You know, it's like, we use expressions like down to earth, grounded, you know, there's a pragmatism to it. It's functional. It's engaged with the world. And so it's like, you know, for me, for example, what is evolving consciousness like in the immanence, in the pragmatism? It looks like, you know, running a business, you know, and all the back end stuff of that, and that teaches courses and codifying structure and using technology, and then hiring people and dealing with tax and organization and branding and marketing and all of these things, which are like a very pragmatic approach to this larger sense of purpose. And it's the same for you. It looks like, you know, getting on a train and going to work and like having meetings and you know, all the other stuff that goes on in your organization, which is a pragmatic and imminent approach to living this purpose. It's like here, day to day, in the grit, in the mundanity, in the like, you know, the mundanity is magic in that way. When it's like, when it's connected to the soul and the soul is in immanence, there's this magicness in the mundanity. Like I go out in the garden and I like dig and, you know, lay down mulch, and it's like this series of mundane tasks. Like, and then the plants are growing, and every day I go there, the plants are a little bit bigger. And then there's like, they're eating, like fruits are growing on them, and I can eat them. And it's like the garden gets greener and things starts happening. But it's like this series of like repetitive mundane tasks over a period of time that leads to that kind of, that opening, that transcendence.
Totally. It actually has me present to just like, you know, I at the beginning I was saying like how, you know, the last few years have been kind of challenging and humbling, and I think it's had me like appreciate kind of this kind of grounded day-to-day mundane level of existence a whole lot more. And this like, this has me like, because I've like for years now I've like studied and done so many courses and like had these super lofty aspirations and like I've still got all that, you know, but there's like after like the years of challenge, you know, and feeling kind of a bit disillusioned and a bit kind of like also like I don't know, just coming to reality more or something, you know, like it's like, and also just like sitting with like, okay, you know, actually some of these things I might never kind of manifest, you know, and but intrinsically they're still meaningful to me, and so I'll still keep working on them, you know, and I'll get where I get to, and then, you know, the day-to-day stuff of just like sitting on the train with my daughters, you know, and kind of laughing together, you know, and kind of, you know, sitting in a meeting with people at work and we've got to get down to business because we're under pressure, but at the same time we can just have that moment together before we kind of dive into that, and kind of where we just, whatever it is, kind of just smile together and drink a cup of coffee. I don't know, you know, like I think sitting with that, the simple stuff, the mundane stuff, there's almost like there's a sense of like light, you know, there's that simple stuff. If we, I think, become really present to it, starts to like, this has been true for me anyway, just like exude more light. There's beauty there. And this is the immanent aspect of the soul, right? You know, that soul presence, I think, starts to show up just kind of because we're just more present, you know, and more appreciating just like each moment, you know, and the specialness of each moment or something like that. So yeah, no.
I just got this beautiful imagery in my head of like a tree, and trees have an internal like vascular structure, so similar to veins, like their version of a vein. And they have two types. They have a phloem and a xylem. I forget which one's which, but one of them is pumping water up from the earth and all the way up to the leaves, which then is evaporated. And it's like it's transferred. It's going up. There's this ascendant quality, this rising of the sap, which is their internal structure. And then the other one, the photosynthesis is occurring out on the leaves, and it's bringing that nutrient down into the roots. And so there's this constant flow that's happening all the time, up and down. There's an upwards and a downwards flow consistently inside this tree. And I just got the hit of like us with that kind of structure, with this ascent, you know, this transcendent and immanent. There's like a flow up through me that like connects with the divinity of the cosmos, that is like one with the universe in some way, whether I'm conscious of it or not. And then there's also some way that the universe is manifesting down into reality through me, down into the most mundane details of my life.
Yeah, I love that as a metaphor. And also like, because the transcendence, like the sun, you know, so like you know, like taking in the energy of that and kind of bringing it down, you know, like
that's right.
That's so good.
And then bringing the roots, like it's almost like, you know, the mundane experiences of life, like sitting on the train with your daughters and laughing, or like watching new shoots grow in the garden or something like that. It's like that's come from really right far down in this reality, and then it's coming up through us, through our experience, and going up into the heavens. You know, it's almost like the when there's photosynthesis, the tree's also releasing water, and that water is going up into the heavens, right? It's being evaporated up into the atmosphere. So it's almost like the beauty of our mundane moments is being transported up into the universe. Through us as a conduit.
Totally. That kind of, that thing of just, if we're just present with what is it, how it actually transmutes into light, you know, that kind of and this is where it's like transcendent and immanent are actually one, you know, it's like they're not separate things, you know. Love that.
I feel like this really interesting sense of wholeness in my body right now. It's like I almost feel both flows occurring at once. It's really like whole harmonizing inside my experience.
Yeah.
It's like a contentness.
Yeah. I feel like really grounded and settled into my chair, but also quite like still and vast. Yeah, vastness and solidness at the same time.
Yeah, I feel that like solid and supple also. Yeah, it's quite a pleasant feeling.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, this like, and there's almost like I'm smiling in the middle of it. It's almost like in my metaphor mind, I can see the tree, and this right in the center of the tree is a little smiling face, in the wood, etched into the wood. It's kind of like how I feel right now, like I'm a being in the middle of this flow.
Nice. Yeah. I'm my attention's still like on organizational life, and I almost like feel this state of presence and the quality of like leadership that's kind of arises out of it, and I feel a sense of like inspiration and aspiration to keep, in a sense, embodying my own soul presence and soul qualities, and through doing so be more in transmission and more in speaking my own sense of purpose, not necessarily in lofty ways, but just, like whatever it is. And the basic kind of can be just like, we've got to get like this kind of email written by tomorrow, like, but if I'm like in transmission, there's somehow a quality of being able to kind of share that in that kind of grounded and vast way that somehow, allows space for people to maybe disagree or to maybe to, like say what they think should go in the email as well. So the quality of presence itself, in a sense, starts to have more of kind of that sense of purpose in there, and for me, there's that larger purpose of what does it look like to kind of collaborate together and co-create together. So how I'm then actually even engaging in like planning this simple task, starts to kind of exude that. And I just had this like image of like having like light beams almost like shooting out of me, and having a vastness of light, and because like going back earlier, how you were saying like the world would change so quickly if like organizations would start to develop soul and awakening, and I think for those of us who feel inspired for it to be in this kind of embodiment of our own soul presence, that's what will then also kind of spark other people, so to speak, for those who kind of are ripe for it, ready for it, to also want to start to step into that themselves. And that to me is how ultimately big change can happen. It's through that kind of sparking of each other, just such that tipping points are reached, and then that sparks others. So this is then we're also, I think, having examples of organizations who are like kind of enacting soulful ways of organizing, creating, are so important, because then they become kind of these shining stars that others can kind of emulate and be sparked by as well. Yeah. And so in this then to me is where, we can each of us be quite strong agents of change, and without even understanding how or why or when that's going to occur, but if we just keep kind of showing up and living in this question of, who am I and what am I about? What's my purpose here, and how is my purpose also just in the basic mundane things, and as I kind of continue to live into that question and face the things that I'm challenged by in the process of it, and become more deeply myself, my soul, in the process, that it can spark others, and that's kind of my belief here. Yeah.
Just being a living example.
Yeah. Which
again is so vulnerable. It's like, what right do I have to think that I'm an example of a beacon of humanity? That's the part that I sometimes get challenged by. Yeah.
What's most challenging about that for you? That people will like kind of say you're arrogant or something like that.
yeah, those kind of things. It's like the moment I like, and I've been doing it incrementally taking a little bit more, not taking a little bit more, but standing in a little bit more of my own power, which has a very interesting, like I've been noticing interesting qualities arising out of doing that. And one of them is like, I give less of a fuck, yet I also still care really deeply. It's this really strange space of being able to hold both at the same time. It's like I don't care about your pettiness or your judgments of me. I care less and less about them. I used to care, less and less. And at the same time, it's like, and I'm still here and I care also. But it is scary of like that targeting that can come from that like, who do you think you are? You know? And that high level of scrutiny of like, oh, you think you're a teacher or you think you're this. Now I'm going to go through everything you ever say or do with a fine-tooth comb from your entire history, things that you said 6 months ago or 1 year ago, and I'm going to hold them against you as a standard. It's like, fuck,
Yeah.
And it's like, no wonder when we hold that kind of perspective, it's like, no wonder more of us aren't stepping up.
Yeah. There's an element to me there of like, almost like as we step more fully into who we are and what we're about, these kind of soul qualities, and in the process of that, become clearer about like purpose, which doesn't have to be lofty, with reference to that sense of purpose, there's a lot of stuff that just becomes noise. And that's kind of what I was hearing you say, like you don't care, right? Like, well, in a sense, it's like, okay, if people want to like take shots at me, it's like, okay, it can be annoying, and sometimes it can be like actually really super hard, and we've got to like defend against it if it's defaming of us and whatever it is, like destructive of brand.
Which has happened to me a few times.
Yeah. But it's like only to the degree that it's serving the purpose. And the rest of it's noise. This is like just becoming more stronger for me, like, and this is my version of don't care, is just like, this doesn't matter. It's like, it only matters insofar as it's relevant to my sense of purpose.
And at the same time, I also like, I deeply care about you, and more often than not, someone who's taking a shot at me or they're really triggered by something I've said because they have a hurt and they have some wound that they're dealing with. So I feel like a lot of care for that. And I'm like, and I actually really feel in those times, it's like, sometimes I don't act as elegantly. Sometimes I come across more defensive than I'd like to. That's, I have my own triggers there as well. But when I don't, it's like, okay, like I actually really care about you, and like, it sucks that you're hurting. And I can't necessarily help you. I can't necessarily do that, but I want you to know that I want to, and that if I could, I would. I definitely like hold that at the same time. It's like,
yeah. I'm hearing in a sense in what you're saying, like, okay, so let's say somebody like, whatever it is, like gets offended by something you've said and kind of maybe takes it out of context or just doesn't like it, and then starts kind of like name calling. That's pretty common, right? Like, rather than actually engaging in respective dialogue, now you're labeled as whatever it is, like, an insensitive man who's like kind of doesn't appreciate feminism or something like that.
Often a lot worse than that, but yeah, something along those lines.
This is me like paraphrasing but so aspects of that are just like noise. From how I'm thinking about this, but there's still purpose present there for you, because I imagine for you there's something around just generally caring for people, and being loving towards people. So then that's where there's this both end of not caring as well as like more deeply caring at the same time. That's how does that fit for you? Like,
yeah, definitely. And and I've had to learn to step away from those places, like learn the times when it's like there's just nothing, there's no response that wouldn't require me to expend like an uneven level of energy for the return that I'd get for it that would make any real difference. But there are other times where it would, where I'll stay in the ring for 5 or 10 rounds, you know, back and forwards, trying to like find the thing that will like support this person in some way, you know. And again, like, who the fuck am I to think that I can support another person? But sometimes I can, you know. Sometimes sometimes I'm just triggered and trying to defend myself, and other times I'm like, I really want you to see this because I think it would be valuable for you and I think it would serve you, you know, and maybe your life would get a little bit better because it sounds like it's not that great right now. And I know what, and I know what it's like to have a sucky life. Like I'm not free of that. Like I've experienced deep pain, you know, and I've had shitty experiences in my life, like lots of them, you know, so I'm not exempt of that. And I don't want anyone to experience that if they don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This starts to touch in on the thing that I think we were going to talk about that we haven't really talked about, and maybe that's a future conversation. But
let's touch on it a little bit.
Let's just like presence it a bit, right?
Yeah,
Which is, I think in a lot of these types of instances where it might be like Facebook kind of, you know, like debate, or maybe more intense at times, you know, fighting. It's when I think we can get so almost like attached to our concepts of things, you know, this is how it is, that we then disconnect from our ability to share experience, you know, and connect to why I might have a particular concept about something, whatever it is. Like maybe I'm really passionate about kind of destroying the patriarchy, you know, like well, so like, why is that? And I think, so can we get to the experience of it? And maybe for some people that, you know, they interpret the patriarchy as, you know, what has them trapped in a dead end job or something like that, you know, not able to share their creative passions, you know, like, I guess, like, well, cool. Like, let's actually, if we can bring that experience in and let go of some of the labels from it. And the labels can be great. They can help us make sense of things. But if it's disconnected from our experience, then it's just kind of this abstraction that we're not even really clear what we're talking about. And I feel like this kind of fog of abstraction, you know, is like actually, I think really, really dangerous. You know, it's like very disassociating. And so to me, the basis of actually creating really generative, positive dialogue is constantly coming back to the experience and seeing if our concepts, our abstractions are actually, you know, helping us understand and engage with our experience more deeply, to then actually be able to possibly take action, or, you know, come to shared reality about things such that we, you know, we're changed somehow, you know, which is to me what generative dialogue is ultimately about. And then I think there's an extra dangerous class of all this where people, because of the social groups that they're immersed within, start to just repeat the abstractions that their social groups say. So now it's not even about my experience. It's about actually my experience is one of being in a group that doesn't, whatever it is, doesn't like the patriarchy. And now that's a meme that I've become infected with based on my social group. And this to me is an example of like dangerous sleep. You know, I'm just parroting the meme. I'm just saying it because that's what my friends say, and it feels good to belong to that social group. And I'm not actually connecting back to the experience. You know, like if I was being honest and sharing, you know, around that, I'd be like, actually, just all my friends say that, and that's my experience. That's why I'm sharing it. But I don't even really know what that means, you know, like, but no one's going to say that kind of stuff, you know, like, so.
But somehow I found myself embroiled in defending and rallying for this concept that actually I don't really know what I'm doing. It just like, that's just part of the social group. That's what has me feel like I have belonging.
Yeah, totally.
We have a common enemy.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't even know who that enemy is, but at least I have friends.
Yeah. I think a lot of it happens. Well, so this to me is the other version of awakening. So there's awakening, which is like awakening to larger context. Wow, there's a lot more going on here than I realized, right? And that can be in all kinds of ways, you know, like organizational context, spiritual context. Like I have an internal reality. Oh my God, there's way more going on in my internal reality than I ever realized, you know. But then there's also awakening to like experience, you know, where I'm like, and this is also a lot of what I do in organizations. To me, this is a basis of learning. You know, if I'm going to learn, I have to go, hang on, what do we think's going on here? and okay, if we think that's going on, whatever it is, like, I'm trying to keep grounding what I'm saying in real examples, so maybe there's a process in an organization where I have to, like, ask for permission to spend money or something like that, and it's actually taking me a long time to do it, and it's slowing me down. So now, so if I've got the concept of what the process is, and then I can speak to the experience. Okay, here are the examples of where it slowed me down. There was this particular client engagement and this client engagement, and so if we don't actually get to the experience and the specific examples, it's this abstraction that's kind of dead. So awakening to the actual experience of the thing, engaging with the actual experience of what's going on. Now we're in a live living reality, and so there's awakening of actually being in reality and the experience of reality.
I love that. And it's like, in many ways, this is like a really beautiful way to engage social media, for example, like, and I've done this at times, like there were times earlier this year where I posted some, pretty provocative stuff. Like, I sometimes like to provoke, and I went a little bit too far. And I was
this is your positive deviant.
Yeah, it's my positive deviant. I went a little bit too far. And I was posing stuff that I hadn't quite worked out yet. Like, I was working it out, like almost like feeling the sounding board by me putting these concepts out, but I was writing about them as if like this was what I stand for. And I got some really intense backlash. And I was pretty fucked up by it. Like, it really hurt me. Like, I felt like I was in a state of shock, like I'd been under psychic attack. And it took me a couple of weeks to recover from it. But how I responded to it was like, I could just feel this, like, I don't want to fight this. Like, I don't want to fight with this, because like meeting it with the same level of intensity or aggression back just did not feel good in my being. It just felt like there's no way that was ever going to do anything but just create more chaos and conflict in my world and in the world. And so then I literally just wrote really openly about my experience that led me to form those conclusions. Nice. So I gave like a really quite a long backstory around some of my early experiences that led me to think in a certain way that led to these posts. And it was just this great diffusing. It was almost like now my experience could be, my words, my abstraction be connected to viscerally, and this is what I hear you speaking about. It's like, go back to experience. Like, and I've, like if I'm finding someone's writing something and I'm finding myself quite activated and I don't like it, and I feel like there's something wrong. It's like, what is my experience that's having me feel that way? And if I can name that, it kind of like, it drops all the walls. It's like if I write something provocative and someone says like, I feel really upset hearing this because I've had this experience in my life. For me to do anything other than like want to empathize would mean that I'm some form of sociopath, I'm naturally I'm naturally now drawn towards this person and being like, oh wow, like I'm so sorry you experienced that, or like, and now I'm able to take in their point, their contrast of opinion is able to go into me more. I'm going to find myself reflecting on that, like, wow, this person is experienced in this way that's so different than me, and like it kind of challenges the narratives that I'm presenting. It's like, that's going to transform me, versus like coming straight in with a critique. Critiques are okay, but if we come in with a critique, you have to be ready that I'm going to defend my position. Like that, if you come in with a critique, you're going to get a defense. That's just, that's the nature of debate, right? And that's okay. We can do that really elegantly and quite fun. And if you come in with a criticism, you're going to get an even stronger defense, or you're going to get an attack, or you're going to just get dismissed, And a criticism is usually like someone's in a bit of a heightened state. That's what would cause them to criticize. But if you come in with a vulnerability, it's like, I'm disarmed. You just had me put down, like, I've got no weapons now.
Yes. Yeah.
We're no longer in a fight.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, and this is exactly the type of kind of conversation that I just feel really passionate about, kind of teaching and practicing, a conversation that ultimately like connects us more deeply to our experiences and has us knowing each other more deeply because we're sharing our experiences with each other. And if there is difference, when we're sharing from this spot, it will have us actually like stimulated and grown, because that difference means that we're almost like getting to experience, at least vicariously through them, someone else's experiences that I would never have known. And this, of course, like all the places where we get into big, like I was using the patriarchy as an example, and of course, like, people have, been oppressed by patriarchal systems for like ages, like, but of course, that's just one way I could frame it. There's all kinds of ways I could frame it. Maybe it's like oppression of indigenous cultures, or it's like, impression of like, I think the patriarchy is just like one framer on these types of things. But what's way more important is the experiences I've had, along the way. And if I have had a hard time, in this culture, because of where I've been located within it, well then, like, if people can hear my experience of that, that's going to be ultimately meaningful, and like, I had an example of this. I was at a facilitators conference, and it was like a very the theme of the conference was actually Indigenous perspectives, and I ended up facilitating an open session space, and I can't remember exactly how I framed it, but I was like, I want to like hear the shadow, like I want to, like, at the conference, it seemed like there was kind of particular dynamic going on, and I didn't fully understand it, of like, kind of like where, and I think it's pretty typical, like of how there's like a lot of kind of tiptoeing around, how fucked over kind of Aboriginal kind of society and culture has been, without actually kind of almost like properly speaking to it or something like that. And it inspired me to like, let's actually like really get into this and talk about it. And I was like super naive, and I just went in there and I was asking, I can't even remember what I was asking, but I was asking these questions that were probably like, offensive because I was like, just wasn't sensitive to like, some of how hard it had been. But I sincerely wanted to know, and I like kept on, asking about to experience, and I, I ended up in like full tears in that session, and I really got how fucked over Aboriginal society and culture has been, like so fucked over, and that was really important for me to hear that, like to and I was like really touched by it, and when all of a sudden I had a way deeper sense of like just like empathy and I think context, and for me it was like only through that process of like saying what I thought, but all being really open and wanting to understand, wanting to understand these kind of people's experiences and their history, and that led me to actually really having this deep understanding, and so I think it's kind of desperately needed, actually, this type of engagement, and it's actually, there's a larger picture here to me too, which is actually just about our cognitive structures, where we're actually just kind of not particularly well cultured, like how we're educated, and how we're taught to think, to me actually very easily has us falling into the fog of abstraction, the disconnection of abstraction, and where our schools particularly get us is to like be good at kind of regurgitating concepts rather than actually being in the aliveness of the concepts. And then that whole territory is really interesting to me. What is it to be in more process-oriented cognition? Don't want to get too down that rabbit hole, but
I'm like, if we open that up, we'll be here for another hour, and I'm like already turning into a prune.
Yeah, I imagine it's probably time to start wrapping up.
Yeah, the water's starting to get a little bit cold, but I've been.
That's a nice timer for the podcast.
Yeah, totally. Like, I'm cold now. I've become all wrinkled.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm like, I hear it, and I know that I can jam out with you for forever. You know,
Yeah.
very
So
easy
good.
very easy to have these kind of conversations. And,
Yeah.
I like where we've been, and I feel like I've got a couple of new insights. I've been playing with this idea of non-conscious, not unconscious, not subconscious, non-conscious, and it's almost like I think of it in a way of it as being like a deep feminine structure. So I have the deep masculine structure, which is like conscious in a way. It's like it maps everything and it like puts everything in order and it structures the way I think and way I make meaning and how I hold. And there's non-conscious, which is like doesn't really hear words or concepts. It kind of hears something else. I don't know what it is. Like there's just something. It can almost be in a conversation, hear not a single thing and walk away knowing everything. You know, it's like it's this strange way of listening and being impacted. And it's almost like they dance together, the non-conscious and the conscious. And I think of it as a feminine structure and a masculine structure. And, you know, and that those thoughts, I'm opening up another bloody rabbit hole, but I just wanted to make a single point. You know, that concept has come to me from observing particular women in some of the courses that I've been through and how they've explained sometimes it's really difficult for them to listen, but they feel like they're hearing things. They're taking something in, but they're not paying attention to the words. And a lot of the way that I frame my course is very structured and like we're listening to words and repeating words. And I'm like, I spent some time investigating that and I started to feel this kind of this non-conscious experience. And the point was like, I feel it's almost like sometimes that's impacted. Not my conscious structure isn't impacted yet, but my non-conscious structure has some form of impact. There's some form of transformation that's happening inside that I have no idea of what it is.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. Kind of what I'm getting there is in a sense almost like the conceptual versus the non-conceptual mind. There's like the experiential mind.
And
the experiential mind, we can almost like feel that stuff's going on and changing, but it won't even necessarily know what it is. You know?
Unless you're really connected to the feminine and then you know what it is, but you can't explain it in words, you know? That's, you know, often women will have that, they will say that, like, I just know, you know? And, well, how do you know? Tell me about it. And they're like, there's no words for it. And you're like, wow, you know something that I don't.
So I get excited at the combination of both the conceptual
Absolutely.
and the non-conceptual.
There's that really beautiful way it's almost like the non-conceptual feeds into the conceptual later. At some point in the future, I'll find myself thinking conceptually about things differently, and I won't know how I got there. I won't even think about how I got there. I just realize that I have a different conceptual structure.
Nice. I reckon we bookmark that one and do another session just around that theme.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Khali. It's been lovely.
Sweet.
Any final like thoughts or anything you'd like to share to wrap up? You can promote yourself if you want to, or whatever you want. You know, have the last word.
I think I'm just sitting with this thing of soul and organizations and the world and I think I feel quite kind of touched by that part of the conversation, and I feel almost like deepened in just like some of my own inquiry and desire there. Is there stuff I want to promote? Kind of at this phase of like, I'm wanting to start getting I want to start teaching a bit more than I have been, but it's kind of still probably a little bit off. I'm running a retreat with the Love Fest crew in a couple of weeks, so excited to do that. Prem and I are doing a retreat around soul stuff coming up in the new year, so I think I just want to say, if anyone kind of feels inspired to reach out from any of this conversation, that I'm available.
How do they reach out to you?
Probably email is probably the best. Khali@khaliyoung.net. Yep. I need to like build out more structures, or they can go to the tribe.earth website.
Mm-hmm.
I think a quality that I'm feeling at the moment is one of wanting just to, I think, keep coming back to truth, beauty, and goodness, or something like that. You know, something about continuing to deepen in the sense of contact with that in myself, and continuing to almost like let the noise of everything else just kind of be that, you know, and just kind of respect it and acknowledge it and allow it, you know, without having to necessarily engage. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Khali.
Thanks, Amy.
Talk to you soon.
Great. Love you, mate.
Same.
Bye.